let's keep this conversation moving. I'm going to introduce you to the panel. So to start with, we've got a moderator tonight from Lamps Media who are hosting this event, and really thankful for the film crew, Joseph and the team, and Sally Illingworth, who will be the host tonight. Sally, I'd like to call you up on stage. Thank you very much for attending. I think we need a chair mover. Who's here we go. You had one job, guys. You had one job. That's okay. Look, our first guest panellist is a client of ours, and you know, I've got to know him really well over the past 24 months, and I think one of the things I really admire about Chris Tansey, who's the executive domain ways of working at NAB, is that he really is passionate about the topic of Agile. I know this because he really gives us a very clear direction when we work with him about what he wants to see put in place. But two, I see it every day when I talk to him and his team about the work that they do throughout NAB, and it's not an easy job running domain ways of working, I can assure you that. I'm amazed he hasn't got less hair and more grey in it, but I'd like you to put your hands together, Chris Tansey. Secondly, every group has a superstar, and we have many at Alchemy, but we can't forget one in particular that is just, I would consider one of our best Agile people, one of our best Agile minds. She speaks Russian, which I won't get her to do because we might all get frightened by that language, but Ruby Eventstar, please come up to the stage. And of course, we're wearing a dual hat tonight. Unfortunately, we had a speaker from Caterpillar who couldn't make it at the last minute. So we have a fill-in, more than a fill-in. I think he's quite worthy of taking a seat in his own right. This gentleman here has been with Alchemy since the beginning in 2017. Has just an incredible way about him of working with Agile teams. We did a project for Inchcape Digital, and he's going to speak on their behalf tonight, where we built a car configurator for them in 2018, I think it was, in Salesforce. So we had a full team in there. They wanted Edwin to stay on board for another 6 months. Fast forward to 2023, he's still there. He's now the digital product owner globally for that product, and runs team in both the Philippines and in Colombia. So I'd like to welcome to stage Edwin Goon. So 3 rock stars of Agile, Sally, we have here in front of us, and I don't want you to take it easy on them. I'd like you to make sure that we thoroughly investigate the topic of scaling Agile and make sure that we get an audience value out of this conversation.
And so who should recite the manifesto first?
With that, I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here this evening, and thank you very much to our panellists for making the time to have this discussion. I'm mindful of time, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. And I'd love to get started with yourself, Chris. You work at NAB, and as Luke shared with everyone, you have quite a substantial role there. So when we think about how the world has changed, what are your views on the connection between ways of working and competing to win customers, especially in a competitive space like financial services?
It's sort of table stakes these days, and I think how you choose to do that and how you choose to show up inside the company for your people is how you can compete within that. So everyone has to work this way now. We sort of don't have a choice, but it's absolutely the right thing to be doing. But lots of people are doing it badly. There's pockets of us that are doing it badly, absolutely. Otherwise I wouldn't have a job. That's great. But we've got pockets that are doing it really well. And for us, we're in a bit of we're in a time where we've acquired 3 companies recently, integrating those companies in. We've had to do that rapidly. We've had to find different interesting ways of doing things. This has sort of helped us. But I think everyone needs to do it, and you can compete within that.
And so would you say that ways of working can be used to differentiate and develop better competitive agility? Like it's something that you can use as a way to discern yourself in the market?
Yeah, and I think we're quite purposeful in that. We do that with UBank. Is it UBank? Yeah, thanks, sorry. That's really good. Previously, 86400, we bought them because we admired their agility in the market. We knew that they were a much more modern tech stack. We were going to be able to compete much more aggressively in that market, and that's what we've done. So, and we continue to do that with other acquisitions. And then we learn from them and build that sort of same capability internal.
And Ruby, it'd be great to hear from you, in your experience, what some of the driving forces are behind the popularity, if you like, of Agile, and why are people attracted to Agile, organisations attracted to Agile?
Yeah, sure. Hope that this is on. So why people are attracted to Agile is, I think I can speak from personal experience and say I started my career in very waterfall environments and was ready to quit the digital world completely, just because I felt a complete lack of empowerment and ability to build the right things for the customers. There was no agility, there was no pivoting, there was a briefing, you stuck to that, and then it just became arguments about change requests for the rest of the project. And I think Agile is amazing in the way that it brings teams together. It gives them a sense of ownership over what they're creating, and that is one of the many things that Agile does, I think, which really breeds innovation and getting the very best product to our customers, taking into account our customers at every time.
And what are your views, Edwin, on the attractions of Agile, particularly frameworks like SAFe? I heard you chuckle, so I think you could relate a bit to what Ruby was saying.
Well, I mean, I was just, everyone's been in a project, right, a waterfall project, but who's been in one where there hasn't been a change request, right? So really it's the ability to adapt, the ability to embrace and plan for that change, particularly when it comes to adapting a framework or some agile method specifically. Belinda said earlier, she's a Mac user. The world would be better if everyone was just Microsoft users. Everyone's speaking the same language. Right? But
I disagree, I'm a Mac user as well.
Me too.
Okay, well, I'm sorry for starting a little bit of a fight up here on stage. But basically that's what SAFe is, as we saw on the slide earlier, is that honestly, this is a co-sponsored by SAFe, but regardless of whatever method, it's the idea of having one common language across the entire organisation, right? Just pick one, just so that we can all speak the same language, and get that out of the way and start actually doing the work.
And, it was interesting when I was doing research for this discussion to try and get up to speed on Agile and what it is and what it means. I came across a lot of discourse about, whether or not Agile is a process, is it a mindset, does it focus on processes, does it focus on outcomes? So interested to hear from each of you, but we might start with yourself, Ruby, on what your views are on this and how can we make sense of it all, because I don't feel like I came to a conclusion in my own reading.
So, process versus outcomes, what Agile is all about. I think it is about both. So I don't think you can say it's one or the other. So something that springs to mind is a quote. I recently read Atomic Habits, which blew my mind. Have other people read that? Yeah. Amazing. So I'm going to completely butcher the quote, but it goes something along the lines of, we don't rise to the level of the goal, but we fall to the level of our systems. And I think it's so true, especially from the Agile sense, because we can have the biggest aspirations, but further to what you were saying, Edwin, if we're not all speaking the common language, we don't have those processes and rituals and cadences in place to keep us aligned and keep us working towards a common goal, then we can have the biggest goals in the world, but are we going to be able to execute upon them effectively? I really think that having a good framework then allows us to get those really great outcomes quicker and quicker as you move on in your maturity.
Yeah, and I do agree. They do go hand in hand. So my background is process, so I know quite a bit about Toyota and all the fun stuff. So Toyota production system, fantastic. They love to open up their doors for people to come in, but they get people coming in thinking, wow, this is a fantastic set of tools. Well, if you walk away with the tools and a mindset, you walk away with a hammer, everything to you looks like a nail, right? You're using the one tool for all the different problems that you have. So it's more about understanding your mindset as well as having the right tool set.
Yeah, I'd agree. Oh, geez, that's really got loud now. I'll just hold it back here. It's both, and mindset's harder to come by, and you've got to find the people with the right mindset in your organisation and then celebrate the hell out of them and put them up in lights and show the good work that they're doing. But you've also got to come at this again and again as your organisation changes. So if you're a startup or a scale-up, my husband's in a startup where, like, there is no process. Like, they just get shit done every day of the week, and he laughs at me writing out my silly little PowerPoint packs, talking about frameworks. He's like, you are such a loser. But when he's got 35,000 staff to think through, then he's going to need to start focusing on that stuff. So I think process becomes more and more important the more people you've got in your organisation. But mindset's the thing that you've just got to celebrate the hell out of and find those pockets in your organisation.
I have one thing to that. So I completely agree. And I also think that the correct processes actually enable that collaboration and psychological safety to actually really enhance the mindset and get people thinking in a more agile manner. So you can kind of start with the processes when you're still kind of maybe immature at baseline, and then as you up your level of maturity, you can throw whatever processes don't work out the window, but you've got that baseline of agile ways of thinking to just make it work without them.
Yes, spot on.
So when it comes to engaging employees, I'm interested, from what I understand, little I know about Agile by comparison, but I understand role clarity is a big thing that comes from Agile. So what's your, and I'm interested to hear from yourself, Chris, first, what's your view on the relationship between achieving employee engagement, which is particularly important post-COVID, and role clarity?
Yeah, we have oh my God, she's videoing me now. We have 30 staff in our team that are trying to go at this every day of the week to fix role clarity. Problems around product owners versus product managers, that's a classic one for us. Project managers versus RTEs and all these other roles that still exist in the organisation. It's really critical to get right. It's really hard to get right. I don't think anyone's really nailed the POPM problem. If you have, let us know. We'll pay lots of money to fix it. But it's really critical. I think engagement's an interesting one when you're implementing agile practices, because it can be very frothy for a period of time. Each time you go through that new change, you'll get that really sort of up and down in engagement. But we have been struggling with role clarity for quite some time. We think we nail it, and then something else comes along that suggests that it's not quite there. So it's a real work in progress for us. And I think it's just always going to be a continuous practice for us to keep focusing on it.
And I think you definitely highlight that it's difficult to get right, and it's something that you're continuously working on. So in thinking about the journey of rolling out Agile across an organisation, Edwin, I'd love to hear from you as to whether or not there's any case studies that you, in your experience, look to for inspiration.
I mean, I think it's quite easily to kind of mention some of the ones that everyone knows, things like Spotify. You introduced the Spotify model. I'd probably take a more controversial approach, not so Agile related, but very heavily influences Agile is Toyota, being on the verge of bankruptcy and taking a lot of those lean thinking sort of methodologies and tools that is currently within the Agile tool set to really focus on things like efficiency, reducing waste, providing value to the customer. The things that matter to an organisation is the customers. So that's the type of thing that I go to, particularly when thinking about that.
So when it comes to scaling Agile, which is one of the sort of key points that we wanted to work through tonight, Ruby, I'm interested to hear your views. Does there need to be a balance of sorts between wanting to adopt new ways of working, but also moderating the level of disruption that happens to how things are currently done?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I have thought about this a lot whenever I go into new engagements, and I think at the end of the day it really comes down to the context of the people or the departments or the areas that you're working with. So there have been hugely successful examples of when people have just gone into Agile, everybody's working in Agile from tomorrow and they just make it work, and then there are other examples in which a slow burn works a lot better. And I think the crux of it is you have to just gauge the room at the time. And I mean, my entire job is kind of trying to convince people to change, and I hate change. Like, everybody hates change. Like, I can understand that. So it's really just trying to meet people where they're at and slowly shift that dial. Whether that's in a big way or a small way, you just kind of have to decide. One engagement at a time.
It's a great approach, I think. Chris, I've heard you say that the journey with Agile for your organisation has been one of transparency and clarity. Mm-hmm. What's been the role of leaders in getting involved in breaking down the work to achieve that?
It's been quite the journey for us. We started with roughly 60% or more of our work being shaped and never delivered when we were on this journey, which is pretty usual for organisations of our size. And so what was pretty important to us was implementing a top-down system that also sort of went bottom-up as well and met halfway. So you've got our strategy tracked all the way down to a user story. It's really clear with all the right measures in our source systems. You can see exactly what folks on the ground are doing all the way back up again. That was really important to us. Bringing transparency to hard conversations. So we, on a quarterly basis, have enterprise planning days. We used to have them at Etihad Stadium. We used to run around like idiots with post-it notes on big corflute whiteboards and yell at each other like it was a marketplace. And now we have really disciplined quarterly discussions that where actually it's almost a marker on a quarterly basis to say, get your stuff sorted by this date, because we're going to have a conversation about anything that is still contended. And then we're actually making really tough trade-off decisions, sometimes almost impossible trade-off decisions, but we're able to make them now. The first time we ran that process, we had leaders, it was in COVID, so they couldn't quite dramatically run out of the room, but they was like ending the call on Zoom and threatening not to come back and ridiculous behaviour. But now people are in there facing the challenge, having the conversation, and they've got the data in front of them. That's been a huge shift for us.
And so when we think about the effectiveness of how teams are functioning with Agile, and particularly trying to, I suppose, help people along on that change journey, Edwin, I'd love to hear your views on, how do you go about measuring the effectiveness of Agile ways of working, and are there any examples you can share with us, whether quantitative or qualitative?
Yeah, this is something that I'm kind of pondering on a lot at the current client that I'm at. So, of course, measurement is important, right? Like, anyone try driving at night with your headlights off with no dashboard, right? You don't know where you're going, you don't know if you're about to crash, you don't know if you're going backwards, right? So it's very important to know that, how you're performing to be able to improve. You go back to your learning cycle in Lean or Agile, whatever you want to call it, plan, do, check, act, right? The core part of that is the checking and acting upon that. So if you're not checking and acting, you're just planning and you're doing the same thing over and over again. What is that? Insanity? So it's very important to measure, to make sure that you're always improving on yourself. If you want to talk about measurements, right? Your standard things like velocity, cycle time, lead time, understanding your throughput, increasing the amount of predictability that you have in terms of what you can deliver. But then on the flip side, when you come to the more qualitative things, right? Customer feedback, how is that coming back to you in terms of, are your customers happy? Does that mean that you're going to get more sales? Are you going to get more value out of it? So, if you're not measuring, then you might as well just be doing the same thing over and over again.
And so something that maybe is a little bit more difficult to measure, that being alignment. Ruby, interested in your views on the function of alignment when it comes to trying to scale Agile across an organisation successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both Edwin and Chris have touched on this already, but when I think of Agile and like, you have all these different rituals and cadences and processes and ways of working, and I think at the end of the day, one of the main reasons we do that is just to continuously ensure that alignment. So particularly if you're working within a very large organisation and 35,000 people, I think you said, Chris, that's massive. Biggest organisation I've ever worked with. You have to have a common understanding, to Edwin's point, a common language to ensure that alignment. You need to know what role to talk to for what. You need to make sure that we're all continuously on the same page and working towards the same goal. And I think that is one of the fundamental reasons why working in Agile is so important, is to ensure that alignment.
And so when it comes to managing expectations as you're rolling out Agile across an organisation, Chris, I'm interested in your views on, how do you manage everyone's expectations about that change process, and should you expect people to be engaged with the change from the outset, or no?
Well, I'm going to give you a really bullshit answer. It depends. For us, we have had, in some ways, a top-down. We've made a top-down change, but we've allowed optionality in our model, and we've made a series of trade-offs, quite a number of trade-offs, through implementing that model all the way through the bank. That means we've got to revisit it and revisit it and revisit it incrementally. But for us, what was really important most important wasn't the Agile workforce and getting that humming. It was stabilising our share price and ensuring our costs were right, and lots of other things that go into running the bank. And so having the leaders around the table that were experienced at that and that could do that for us was important, rather than turn the whole organisation on its head and say, we're working in chapters and tribes tomorrow and you're welcome and go figure it out. So we've done it incrementally, and that's a choice we've made, and it's meant that we've made a lot of trade-offs. And one of the biggest trade-offs we've had is leadership buying into the way that you work. And so we bring people together to transition them into their new domain, and we do that in a big design intensive, and it's like a week-long thing. We take them away from their day jobs. They hate it. They're calling us beforehand saying, let me walk you through the Agile Manifesto. I don't know if you've heard about it before. They're like telling you, I don't know what the agenda is. This is going to be crap. I'm going to get nothing out of this. And they come out of the back of the third day or even the second day saying, we need to get more people in here. Like, we're really solving, our mission. Like, this is amazing. So we've had to earn that buy-in little bit by little bit in the organisation. That's just taken time, particularly during COVID. That's taken a lot longer.
And I'm sorry to cut this discussion short. I'm mindful that we're running a bit over time, so I'm going to shift gears. And speaking of pulling people out of their day jobs, the final question I want to ask each of you is whether or not you have a view on, is there a role for artificial intelligence when it comes to Agile in the future, whether in terms of training, coaching, otherwise?
So every one of my answers this evening was brought to you by ChatGPT. Not really, but I think it depends. So I think with Agile, even though it comes out of software, it's all about communication and collaboration at the end of the day, and those are two things which are still very, very human-centric. It's very human-centric Agile. So look, the jury's out. In 5 years, in 10 years, I've got no idea what it's going to look like with AI, but I think for the next few years at least, there's still a huge human element to be played in bringing together Agile teams. Yeah.
Edwin, Chris?
So I asked ChatGPT, he said, or she said, it said yes. I think it's a little biased though. But on a more serious note, if you look at how AI is disrupting all of the other industries out there, right? You have deep fakes. You've got AI generating art that you can't tell the difference between a human drawing it or a bot. And there's even arguments in some of the art forums out there where artists are basically being removed from these websites because people think AI did their art. So there certainly is a place for AI in Agile, but I believe in the cases where I see AI used, it's typically where it's used to enhance the work that somebody else is already doing, right? So where I see that going within the Agile space is typically those parts where you're basically automating and basically improving and doing all of those mundane jobs like writing acceptance criteria. Who here likes writing acceptance criteria and user stories? That's, I hope I don't offend anyone. It's like one of the most boring parts of the job.
I was going to say, hopefully no one says yes.
Yes. But yeah.
I use ChatGPT for that. It's great.
You already do it? There you go.
Not on my current engagement. But, I've just future reference. I've tried it out. It works very well if there's any product owners in the house. It's a good starting point, and then you can refine it with that human touch, which is so important. You can't just blanket it out.
Yeah, I've heard other product owners use it to try and work out, when an engineer is pulling the wool over their eyes too. So that can be helpful. It can give you context about the code. I think it will inevitably change things, but if I had those answers, I wouldn't be sitting here doing this. I'd be probably on a resort somewhere and have lots of money. So
Would have outsourced this job.
Yeah, totally. I'd have ChatGPT here instead. I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to it, that's for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to all of our panellists this evening. We are going to open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions, and I believe Luke will be facilitating that, and potentially Natasha if needed. Yeah, perhaps while we're waiting, I've got one, and maybe you, Edwin, in your personal experience, what value has SAFE offered you?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting one, because where I'm at now at Inchcape, they've grown from 3 years ago working in a small office in a basement in Docklands to now, 3 years later, implemented in 40 plus markets across the globe. And going from 30 employees to about an IT shop of about 300 to 400 people, we needed something to give us that common language, as we keep saying. So it's really helped us provide that clarity and governance, and not having to recreate a dictionary full of different acronyms every time. But I think one of the biggest things is the alignment piece as well, is the fact that everything's open, everything's on a Kanban board somewhere within PI planning, you can see everything that's going to be done, and everyone has a say in it, from the developers who actually do the job up to the stakeholders to tell you what the priority is and tell the people doing the job what to do. So there's no dispute, right?
Okay, we've got a question at the front here. I think Ramia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I've got a question right at the beginning. A couple of you said it's really important to have one language. And the question I have is, we've got a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion, cognitive diversity, and especially with firms working, cross-nationally, like we have different countries involved. How do you not push one way of thinking and one culture onto cognitively diverse or diverse nations?
That's a question. This is not my domain.
So I don't know if I have an answer straight away, but I just want to say that I think that is a brilliant question that we should be thinking about, because it's a really great point. Because, the whole thing about Agile is driving that collaboration and innovation and utilizing the diversity of everybody we work with, whether they be in like a business role, a technical role, and really getting them to come together to find the best solution by using their different perspectives. How we ensure that keeps happening when we are trying to get people speaking a common language. Oh, great question. But
Well,
have a go.
yeah, I think it's important to note that while SAFe tries to bring a common language, SAFe is not perfect. Sorry. SAFe is not a perfect framework. That's why it keeps evolving, right? We're at SAFe 6 now. If you look at prior SAFe versions, it was a large focus on IT, right? But moving into SAFe 5, SAFe 6, you're finding that, well, hang on, the business isn't only about IT, it's about everybody else, the business who's in that. So while it's important to have a common language, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop challenging the ideas that are around, right? Which is why that we have these sort of discussions, these communities, so that we can go to people at SAFe and say, hey, I think this is a good idea. And they think about it and they go, yes, it is. So let's keep iterating, let's keep improving on the way that we work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably an opportunity for us to reframe and say it's not about a common language maybe, but it's about a common set of principles and a common understanding that you try to get to. I mean, we've just come back from a trip in Vietnam. We have an engineering centre in Vietnam. An innovation centre, as they like to remind us. And they come at things in a completely different way to how our teams do here. And actually, our biggest reflection was, they spent a lot of their meetings saying, how do we need to change to make sure that, we can be there for the Australian teams? And our biggest reflection was, actually, we've got a huge job to do when we get back to Australia and how they change, and how we can bring them together rather than sort of, forcing our standards and our ways of working and our time zones and everything else on them. In fact, we were completely blown away by their engineering practice, by their culture, by their teamship, like nothing like what we have in our offices back in Australia. So, I think it's actually a common understanding we need to work towards. And for examples like that, it's more about how do we change. Yeah.
I think we had a question.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. So my question is, because I've worked at NAB and I've worked in corporate, and since then I've done a lot of work in startup scale-ups, and my most recent one, we've gone from a very small group of about 27 people in the business, and we've grown it out to about 300. And one thing I found was how Agile starts to lose its wheels as it gets large, and there's a requirement for more structure, and that's where a lot of people start throwing around things like Wagile and things along those sort of lines. And so probably my question to the group is, how do you retain the benefits of Agile in that agility, that flexibility to move and pivot based on your customers, while still being able to retain a level of structure that is embedded when you have a large organisation and you need 90 days lead time or whatever to be able to, get budget and, get risk sign-off and things along those sort of lines?
I might start and just say the two things that I always think about is what's the leanest possible version of this that we can come at every time we think about a new process. If you've gone from 25 to 300, you've probably gone through six or so variations of that. What's the absolute leanest? Knowing that over time, we're all humans, we all want to, for me, if I get the shits with part of the organisation because they're not doing something, my natural instinct is to ask 3 times and then just hire somebody, because I sort of get sick of it. So my team becomes fatter over time, or that process becomes fatter over time because I've just got sick of arguing. That's going to happen everywhere. So what's the leanest version? Start with that, and then you know that you're going to build in some fat over time. The second thing is, it's probably not an agile thing, but it just, as humans, we want to trust each other. We trust each other through a series of small agreements. So, I've started the night with talking to you, re-baselining the last time that we spoke. My level of trust with you is there, but down here, we can make an agreement over something. Hold my phone while I go to the loo. If you're back here, well, then I trust you a little bit more. And so I think just doing that in the organisation as you grow or as you change is also important. We've seen that in a couple of the acquisitions where teams, the team has come in and they're the 30-odd people or the 50-odd people team as a business, come into a big organisation like ours and gone, holy Jesus, the only way we get through that that is through a series of small agreements and just getting better over time.
I might just, if I can, I'm going to ask the last question for the panel because we need to move on. We've got, NAB is huge, right? So I think I'm astounded that there's 550 product owners and managers within the organisation. So that scale is massive, and Inchcape is obviously huge as well, Edwin. I'm interested in your view. We've got Maya and Melbourne Support Services and Melbourne Airport, and I'm just looking around the room. Equity Partners. We've got a few. Medibank's pretty big, but you've got lots of businesses in the room who probably are sitting here thinking, well, that's well and good. You guys have got buckets of cash and big organisations. What's your advice to organisations that are looking at this and saying, what's in it for us in terms of Agile, and where would you start? What would you do first if you were those sort of organisations looking at this?
Sorry, Chris, can I just hold on? No, hold it.
Oh, sorry.
We love the sound of your voice.
Oh. It's got that Queensland twang to it. What's my advice? I mean, the first thing is, this is pretty fitting because my husband asks me a lot. And for them, they've been growing, and what they're finding is they have these moments, and this is probably what you found. They have these moments where the founder or the CEO is just so involved in tiny little, like the width of a bloody button on something, and it's stopping everything. But they also, they're fighting over a Figma license or just crazy shit like that. He's had to re-baseline those expectations with that founder time and again as they've continued to grow. They've had to continue to re-baseline those. So I think if you're in an organisation, like in a smaller organisation, finding those moments, being really real about those moments, and then working out what you need to do to overcome that through a series of small agreements, through building that trust, through building that transparency, opening up what you're doing. My partner's a control freak, and so he spends a lot of his time trying to fight the founder on silly little product decisions, and I'm sort of my response to him is, he owns the company, right? Like, why don't you just let him make some of these decisions? But he's had to find those moments to interject and say, okay, now's the time where actually I own the product process, I own the decision making on X, Y, Z. I'm going to take that little incremental extra bit from you and prove to you that it works, and then time again. And we do that in big organisations. So
are you saying letting people do their role and trusting them to get stuff done is a good way of starting?
Yeah, I think empowerment's really, it's such an overused word, but empowerment is where you need to get to. If you haven't done that task either, then do it with them, be there alongside them. If they haven't done the task and you have, then you're there more as a coach and a support, and perhaps a teacher initially. And then, if you've both done the task and you're just being a control freak, then be self-aware about that and sort of step away and empower them to do it.
Good message in there for me.
And me.
Edwin and Ruby, what are your thoughts?
Just quickly to jump on what Chris was saying, if you want a really practical takeaway, which is not going to cost you a lot of money, is just get the right people in the room and start doing a retrospective. It's one of the simplest agile practices to adopt, and if you don't adopt anything else, you're building that trust, you are building the psychological safety, and you're going to be talking about things that you can improve and then go away and improve it and come back on a regular basis.
There's people who probably don't know what a retrospective is.
A retrospective is effectively you can do it with a team level, department, for a specific project, but basically you just get people in a room and say, for the last 2 weeks or for actioning this project or whatever you want to reflect upon, what went well, what didn't go well, and what do we want to change for next time. And you facilitate in such a way that whether you're a shy person or a very confident person, everybody gets a say, and you vote upon the items which everybody thinks are most important at the end of the session, and then you take the most critical thing is that you actually action those items. So you assign them owners, and then you come back on a regular basis to see, okay, we we've changed the ways of working based on this retrospective. How did that work? And then you reflect upon it and you pivot again, and that way you're just building in continuous improvement into your working cycle.
I love that, Ruby.
It's critical.
Love that. That's really cool. And Edwin, you get the final say.
Yeah, I guess the easiest thing to do to start would be to contact Alchemy Solutions.
Wow, that was cool.
No, so I think it's to start small, right? Like a lot of these things, it's a big change to change the way that you work. So the way that I like to tackle it is start a prototype. Like get a small group, if it's one team, 10 people together, and start proving that this methodology works at a small scale, right? Start doing your test and learn cycles and start measuring, of course. Don't just do it without measuring. But the idea is that once you create that one small spark in an area to say that it does work, you're going to start getting other teams to come in and saying, hey, I want that too. You look at where I am at Inchcape, that's basically where we started was the program that I'm on was basically the first Agile program in the whole organisation. And we went from 30 people, one market, to within 3 years' time, 40 different markets around the world, 500 people.
And your development teams in the Philippines and Colombia, right? So
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, panel. I'd like you to put your hands together for the panel, everyone.